Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the 25th time of the Writer Festival, and this is the lunch hour special. I'm so grateful to be in conversation with Dr. Siphiwo Mahala, who joins us live from somewhere in South Africa. I have no idea, but I think, Siphiwo, what are you doing globetrotting the way you've been globetrotting? Good afternoon, hi.
Afternoon, thank you. Well, I'm connecting from Limpopo now, attending a wedding. So it's been a very good kind of globetrotting, yeah.
You look absolutely wonderful. So thanks for joining us, making the time. And I also want to thank everybody who's joining us via all sorts of other mediums, Facebook and so on. So do stay with us. We are going to speak about something absolutely special that I think Siphiwo has been working on for years. Siphiwo, how long have you been working on this for?
It's 9 years, I think. The way it began, I started with the interviews in 2013, and then a year later I registered for PhD, and then when I thought it was done, I graduated in 2018, and then there were more challenges after that. I won the NISS award, the National Institute for Humanities and Social Science award, to convert my PhD thesis into a book. So finally, we have the very first Ken Themba biography. I have assembled, the book will only be out in stores in a week's time. So this is just a sample that you see here.
Can't wait. Absolutely can't wait. Let's start with the title, Ken Themba, just to break down the actual title, Intellectual Tsotsi, and how we got here to terming and framing him as the Intellectual Tsotsi. I know that you pulled that from some other reference, but maybe take us through that.
Well, that's a line that comes from Louis Ngosi, who described Ken Themba as an intellectual Tsotsi. And in my research, I found that the Tsotsi and intellectual paradox, best describes Ken Themba in the sense that he's much celebrated as an intellectual, as we all know, but he was kind of intellectual who was rooted in people's lived experience. He was sympathetic and almost at times romanticized, the conditions of Tsotsis, people on the ground. And we get this even from Ahmed Kathrada, one of the people whom I did interviews with. And also in his work in general, Ken Themba sort of humanizes the Tsotsi. He tries to put in context, how does one become what they become? And essentially that has been my interest in Ken Themba as well. How did he achieve all of the things that he achieved, and how did he not achieve what potentially could have been some of his best works?
Just picking up on you talking to Ahmed Kathrada, when you went to talk to him, you were looking for something else, right? You were trying to discover whether there was any connection to the liberation movement at all, if there were any underground activities, political underground activities he had embarked on. And you discover, of course, he was not involved in the true traditional sense of the word. However, you discover something else and you make up your own mind about what you make of his political involvement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you do a study about anyone, especially in the 50s, which we all know that it was a politically unstable period in South Africa. So, a lot has been said about Ken Themba being apolitical on one hand, and on the other, when I heard that Ahmed Kathrada could reveal some information that I did not know about Ken Themba's direct involvement in the liberation struggle. So I thought, wow, finally, this is the big break, and he made it clear to me, like even before we started the formal interview, I told him that, yeah, I hear that you knew of Ken Themba's involvement in the liberation struggle. And he was very clear to say, no, I don't know such, And I think over time, I've learned to ask the same question different ways, but the answer was still the same, no. And so that became clear to me that actually, he did not need to be a card-carrying member of any political organization in order to be politically conscious. And his works, show us his kind of thinking, his orientation in terms of political issues at the time.
I mean, he's quite a dynamic man, a complex man, because that also comes through in his affirmation of being an African and non-use of African languages.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very complex character, Ken Themba. The process of research, I mean, it was the process of trying to understand him. This is someone who was born in Marabastad, and most of us know him, associate him with Sophia Town. And yes, he lived in Sophia Town for many years, but other than Marabastad, he moved to, he studied in Limpopo, Seshego, before, getting a scholarship to go to the University of Fort Hare. Now, I've been told that Ken Themba spoke English only, but the question that arises is that was this a language spoken in all the areas that he stayed in? Did he speak English only in Marabastad, in Atteridgeville, in Seshego, and in Alice, where he studied, as well as Sophia Town? And so I had to balance issues looking at official records, and his applications from as far back as 1944, for instance, when he's asked about his tribe, back in those days, he would identify as Zulu, and then mother tongue, he would put Afrikaans, and again, but looking at his works, you find that he uses a bit of his Xhosa there, and a bit of Setswana there. I mean, he went to Botswana, where he interviewed a number of people in the 50s, and he was conjugating Setswana of those people. And we also know that he wrote Tsotsi, which was quite prevalent in Sophia Town. So he was a very complex character generally.
Yeah. Let me pick up quickly on the trip to Botswana, and I just want to highlight just how much he committed to the struggle of women that we don't talk about much. So when he went to Botswana, he was going to interview women who were immigrants, South Africans who left, some of which had come from Zeerust and so on. But very little had been documented around the struggle of women in Zeerust. I mean, we talk a lot about the march that goes to Parliament, but we don't talk about that. And he's one of those people who did document how women had been part of the struggle in South Africa.
Yeah, Ken Themba was that kind of a journalist who wouldn't go with a popular narrative. He always, tried to move the center. In other words, look on the periphery and bring some of the stories that are not very, so popular, so to speak. So there's a story there of women who refused to carry passes, and then in the end had to cross the border and settle in Botswana. So Ken Themba, together with Peter Magubane, the photographer, whom I was fortunate enough to speak to. So he went to Zeerust. From Zeerust, he crossed the border and interviewed some of those women, and which is something really amazing. You would recall, for instance, with my play, The House of Truth. One of the stories that he did was about Alcott Gwenche, where he actually went to the Northwest, French Dale, to interview Alcott Gwenche, who was an internal exile, so to speak, because Alcott Gwenche was from the Eastern Cape, but because he was causing so much trouble, he was from Tsomo. So he was dispatched to Mpumalanga Bushbuck Ridge, and then he got there and he started a soccer team and a music band. So when he became...
It was quite a hostile environment when he arrived. I mean, I remember even the language being so different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what the apartheid government did was to identify an area where you wouldn't have much influence and you wouldn't connect with the people in that area. So they sent him to Bushbuck Ridge, where there's barely anyone who could speak IsiXhosa, with the hope that he'll be ostracized in that community. And this is what Ken Themba called the concentration camps. So he, and then, when he started being influential in Bushbuck Ridge, they shifted him and sent him to French-Dale, which is a very somewhat outlandish place in the Northwest. And even there, he formed his band, and then was becoming problematic again. But the point here being that Ken Themba liked, discovering those kind of stories, and a story like this one was sort of marginalized, and Ken Themba, wrote in such a sensational manner that journalists from over the world came to South Africa to see this concentration camp that this journalist was talking about. So
yeah, I mean, I beg your pardon, I was going to say it's the use of that language and how he would frame it that suddenly it did get a lot of international attention. I mean, no one had called it a concentration camps before until he coined it that to get everybody's attention.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd recall that this is the 50s, so shortly after the Second World War, and the memory of concentration camps in Nazi Germany were still very, very fresh. So it was natural for the world to react the way that it reacted. And Ken Themba knew what he was doing.
Some of the work that is, I suppose, not documented too much is just how much he immersed himself when he went to do some assignments. Immersed himself in the people to get the story. There was no such thing as a band story for him or a location. He went in there with his photographer and got the story and more nuanced stories because he immersed himself with the people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Ken Themba could write about anything and make it sensational because his interest. I think the synergy between journalism and literary training helps me a great deal in developing nuanced stories that rise from being an ordinary story into something extraordinary. I mean, you can see that even in his literary works, for instance. If you think of a story like The Suit, which is his most well-known story, The Suit is essentially just a piece of cloth. And this man was able to develop a story out of a piece of cloth that has outlived his own life. Ken Themba was 43 when he died in 1967. And he published The Suit in 1963. And I'm telling you, if The Suit were to be back on stage next week, it will fill the theaters again. People continue to enjoy and celebrate that story. And yeah, that's the kind of writer Ken Themba was. He did not write for the present. His writing is an overgrain of some sort. Yeah.
I mean, when one thinks of, he died at 43. It's quite a short life that he had. Impactful, but short. But I want to talk a little bit about his term in drum and the wonderful decade in drum. But the difficulties that we may not talk about a lot, the fact that he could not become an editor, for instance, those frustrations. the limitations that keep reminding him that he's a black man in apartheid South Africa, and what that meant for a man who really just wanted to write. He was a writer at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Ken Themba, much as most of us know him as the journalist, columnist, and the assistant editor of Drum. Drum broke him a great deal because Ken Themba worked as a teacher. He was writing, and he had been writing. The earliest works I have access to here date as far back as the mid-40s. But he got well known after winning the Drum Short Story competition, the very first competition, and then in 1953, and then he was roped into the Drum stable. And when he joined Drum, he did not drink at all.
Yes, isn't that something?
He did not drink at all. And two things happened. He was almost like an outsider when he arrived at Drum, always wearing a suit, which is understandable because he had come from the experience of becoming a teacher. And then, they had this game that they played, I forget what it's called now, which is about drinking, which was introduced by the proprietor of Drum, Jim Bailey. That's on the one hand, and on the other, generally, journalists were encouraged to drink, and some actually drank to overcome the kind of images that they were exposed to during the day, because they were not just reporting about this community. The atrocities that were affecting the Black communities were affecting them as well. So many of them would drink to wipe out all those images from their heads. So that's one aspect of things. But the other is that since 1953, during 1953, Ken Themba soon rose up the ranks. And by 1955, he was already the associate editor at Drum. And he worked under 3 editors. And every time when he joined Drum, it was the editor was Anthony Sampson. And then Anthony Sampson left, and the other editor, I forget his name now, was brought in. And then when that editor leaves, then he has to, close the gap and act as the editor until another editor is imposed, coming from, most of the editors came from England. Yeah. So he had to continue working as the acting editor until another editor comes from England, and then he hands over to them. So, and when he hands over, he actually teaches them, because Drum, reported about conditions in the township, boxing, beauty queens, witchcraft, and all sorts of things that are familiar to people in the townships. So essentially, you cannot expect an editor brought in from England to be well versed with that aspect of things in the township. So Ken Themba was practically the editor, but he could not be the editor. So that was part of his frustrations while working for Drum.
Well, in fact, to your point, remember when they started with Drum, the white man's idea of what Drum was meant to be was to romanticize rural land and, African traditionalism and so on. And so it is this cohort that decides, no, you guys have missed the mark. We as urban Africans have other things to talk about.
Yeah, when Drum was formed in 1951, it became a monumental failure, because they had that perception that they have to agitate for return to the village, to the rural area. Yet the people, rural nostalgia. Yet their target market were people in the cities, and those people had no did not harbor ambitions of returning to the village, because they were making life in the urban space where they lived. So after the first few issues, realizing that they are not doing well, research was conducted, and it became clear at that stage that the approach that they were taking was totally incorrect. And then that's when they brought in, and at that time, much as they claimed that their target market was the Black readership, they had only one Black contributor, and that was Henry Mahala. So after realizing their mistakes, that's when they introduced means to rope in more Black contributors, the likes of Arthur Maimane, and also introducing the short story competition, which Ken Themba won, and subsequently he was roped in. By the way, I forgot the second editor was Sylvester Steyn. Sylvester Steyn, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, let's stay there, Siphiwo, because then I think it's Hopkins that follows after that, right? Is it Hopkins?
Yeah, yes. Tom Hopkins
yes.
was the one followed.
Which really was actually probably the beginning of his end, the beginning of the end of an era at Drum, because he arrives, totally different man with his own leadership style. Yes, he understands writing, but he comes here as an outsider, different leadership style. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get the essence of the place, let alone the essence of the team that he's working with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the mistakes that Tom Hopkins did was not to understand the people he was working with and the kind of stories that they created. And it's a pity because Jim Bailey, much as he himself was not an experienced journalist, he allowed these guys, he understood that these guys are making this magazine happen. And then he took a back seat. So almost every editor that came, he would tell them that, look, don't fire anyone. These guys have their own way of finding stories, And he was told, Jim Bailey told Tom Hopkins not to fire anyone here. And then when, if you think, for instance, of someone like Casey Mutsisi, who was one of Ken Themba's prodigies, Casey Mutsisi would go to Shibin to find stories. In fact, once he's in a Shibin within the people, stories would come to him. And this is the nature of the stories of Drum that they developed out of human interaction. And this is the part that Tom Hopkins missed so much that after the very first issue, or the next Monday, he found out that most of these guys did not show up at work, and he went to the.
I want to pick your brain on this because I imagine being them. Where it's difficult anyway to operate within the kind of confinements that they had, pass laws and all of those things. They can't drink. So we sometimes forget the little things, Black people are not allowed to have alcohol. I mean, that's as basic as that, right? The environment for me, I think, became a bit of an outlet, which allowed them to, they were encouraged to drink or allowed to drink at work. Restaurants around knew, there's a Ken Themba Coke special type thing. So somehow that environment, for me, I think, gave refuge to some of the pain that they were experiencing. He was able to write. The guy couldn't be a teacher, even though he was qualified. So in a way, when these editors come and tamper with that, I think it destroyed quite a lot of their soul.
Yeah, I think, as I say, part of the mistake was not to understand the people you're working with and the kind of environment within which they operate. Because even the culture of drinking, as you say, Ken Themba detested people who drank a beer for instance, because he he referred to beer as peace. He believed if you drink, you better drink something solid like whiskey or on bad days brandy, something that would hit the spot. Because you can't be, if you're arrested for drinking beer, you're arrested for drinking peace. With whiskey, is one shot, it goes where it's sent. Whereas beer, you have to keep sipping, and it never does what it's supposed to be doing. So this is the environment within which they worked. Because they drank, but even drinking itself was illegal.
Yeah. So, we sometimes forget how those kind of decisions that we make based on certain laws, for instance, he couldn't drink. And so the quick drink to have was a quick shot, a brandy or a whiskey, how ultimately actually affects us all. The guy had severe stomach ulcer problems, presumably because of the drink of choice.
Yeah, it appears that, Ken Themba had ulcer problems, stomach ulcers from when he was still working for DRAM. Brawili, the late Professor Kyorapesi Khosisile, was one of the people who told me about this, that at one point, Ken Themba came sort of bent it a little because he could see that he's in pain. And he had what he called the rechmakelki, which is his first drink that would sort of make his body rech. Yeah, so once he has had the rechmakelki, he suddenly is fine. And he says, their mistake was to think that the rechmakelki was soothing his body, it was curing, whereas it continued eating into his liver. So it was, when he interprets it, he says it was numbing his liver, and they thought it was curing him.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, we can romanticize the time at DRAM, but it had its own other problems as well. Alcohol, as we know now, became, the staple there. He's also criticized for introducing a lot of young journalists into shebeens and that kind of lifestyle, which many people may say was not quite ideal. Your comments on that?
Yeah, look, Ken Themba, I mean, one of the things about him, he was very close to young people. You'd remember that he was a teacher, for instance. So when he joined DRAM, he became the associate editor on the one hand, and on the other, Jim Bailey established a magazine called Africa, with which they wanted to accommodate Ken Themba's intellectualism, because they felt that DRAM magazine was a popular publication, and did not allow the kind of intellectual depth that Ken Themba possessed. So they established Africa on the other hand. And when he was editor of Africa and associate editor of DRAM, he brought in some of his former students, including Casey Mutsisi and Stan Mujwadzi, So what he did with them, I mean, Casey Mutsisi became his assistant editor for Africa. So he always had that close relationship with young people. And obviously he drank with them because they all drank. So there was a view that some would say Ken Themba was a bad influence to young people. He taught them how to drink. But these young people, I've mentioned Casey, Stan Mujwadzi, among others. I mean, their feeling was that this is the person who interacts with us at our level. He cares about us, and he has been mentoring us from high school up until here. So there are those contradicting views about him. But if you look at him generally, you find that he's got more products, who became something in life. you think of someone like the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, for instance, was his student at Madibane. The late Jubi Mayet, I had the pleasure of interviewing her a couple of years ago. She attributes Ken Themba for her growth in journalism, because Ken Themba was someone who really mentored her in the newsroom. And you find that Ken Themba was this kind of person, whether in the classroom or in his house of truth, where intellectual debates happened, or in the newsroom. He was always a teacher. He was interested in nurturing young minds. In fact, Joe Tlolwe, for instance, who had his breakthrough in journalism under the guidance of Ken Themba, attributes him as someone who really helped many young people and who mentored them, and who was passionate about nurturing young minds.
Yeah. So I'm reminded quickly by, you spoke a little bit earlier about, he always wore a suit and so on. But I have to remind you of when he arrived at a high school for the very first time, just after his stint at Forte and so on. And he was going to be a teacher, and everybody was waiting for this amazing English teacher to arrive. But looked so shabby. He didn't impress them at all however, quickly changed their minds about, okay, fine, he doesn't look so great, but he really is a great man and a great teacher.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, his appearance was not so impressive when he was first introduced at Madibane High School. You remember, this is the 50s, yes. Actually late 40s. It's late 40s, and you have a Black man who is said to have passed English with a distinction at the prestigious University of Forte. And recall at the time that most university graduates, Black graduates, had come from Forte. You would think of the Oral Tambos, you would think of the Mandelas, Actually, in fact, Ken Themba himself went to Forte with the likes of Robert Mugabe, Robert Sobukwe, So there was so much expectation about this man. And when he got there, the students were quite disappointed because his dress was not as impressive.
I want to talk about other matters. So there is a lady that appears quite a bit in this book, which I think is let's just clear it. Ken Themba was married, right? He was married, was with a woman who I think was the one at face value, but there was somebody else, Jean Hart, which I think is a very, very prominent figure in his life.
Absolutely. Well, Ken Themba first, he married in 1959. But before that, the woman he married, he had been with her before, and then they broke up. And then in between, during his drum days, he fell in love with a married woman. What happened basically, there's a man whom, again, I had the pleasure of interviewing before his passing, Malcolm Hart, an Englishman whose family moved to South Africa. So he came to join his family and then brought his wife. His wife followed after he had come to South Africa. So Malcolm Hart had struck friendship with Bloke Motene. And then he was introduced to the rest of the drum guys. So when his wife arrived, they organized a reception of some sort, a welcome party for her at Bloke's house. Bloke Motesane's mom, who herself was a shipping queen. So upon arriving, Jean Hart bumped into Ken Themba. even though their conversation was quite deeply political the first time, she fell in love with Ken Themba and ultimately moved out of her apartment with her husband and went to stay with Ken Themba. So this was a very dangerous one, because on the one hand, generally, we have a married woman moving into another man's house, actually leaving her house to her husband to move in with a lover, but also now this flew in the face of the Immorality Act, So it was a very dangerous thing. Ken Themba writes about it partly. He tries to fictionalize it in Crappy School, where he calls Jean Jane, but we all know that is Jean. So it's one of the most written about relationships, and we learn a lot about Ken Themba and what he stood for in the process. He had a clash with his former girlfriend at that time, someone he had been with for a short time, but also, there was a conflict with the Tsotsis, who felt that actually the former lover reported him to police because that he is sleeping with a white woman, and they tried to catch them, but they missed them. And then the Tsotsis were on the side of the other lover, that is whom he calls baby, because he couldn't be going out with a white woman, whereas our sisters are here. So his argument was that, no, I'm fighting back because white guys have been coming to the township to take our sisters, so I'm returning the favor.
But he was in love. It seems like it wasn't only about that. It really seems like there was something quite special about this, and the end of it, I think, did something quite. It really did dent him, I think, in a way.
Yeah, he was definitely in love with her. When, for instance, the Tsotsis ask him, how is it like to, they even reduce her, they call her fish meat. They ask, how does it feel like to sleep with a white woman? And that's where he says, I had a lot of respect for Jean, the person, because I was in love with a woman. It didn't really matter to him that she was white or anything like that. So as a result, when she finally left, she wanted to leave South Africa. She wanted to go with him, but he refused. He felt he belonged to Sophiatown. He never wanted to leave Sophiatown. So he never wanted to leave South Africa. So, and unfortunately, that led to their breakup. But still, he always looked forward to
the letter.
Yeah, he kept hoping to hear from her and all of that. And that's when he drank more than he used to before. And Louis Ngosi actually says he'd never seen Ken Themba in that state. Actually, even Nadine Godimas says the same.
So one can deduce that this particular relationship and the end of it really was the beginning of the end in a way. Everybody talks about how it affected him, how he drank more. Then he was forced to leave. And let's remember that the reason he never left with her in the first place is because he was so committed to this country. He kept talking about how this country is losing everybody, intellectuals that it needs. And when he's forced to move to Swaziland, it really was the beginning almost of the end for him.
Yeah, I described that period, him moving as a kind of suicide. But you must also understand that, all of these factors just converge against him, because what happened is, on the one hand, yes, he was drinking, but on the other, 1959, he loses his job.
Yeah.
He is fired from drum.
Just before that, Siphiwo, let me just track back a little bit before he actually loses his job. One must remember also that before he loses his job, he's found guilty of drunken driving or something like that. While on the job, he is demoted in a way. He still has to do what he's been doing, but without the title, less money, no title, and kind of being told to go to sit in a naughty corner in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the first place, you recall that Ken Themba was the associate editor, but he was not getting paid above anyone else.
Yes.
This is the same problem that Eskiam Pahlele had, because both Ken Themba and Eskiam Pahlele went to drum already as graduates with teaching experience. And when Pahlele in particular complained, he was told that we did not employ you for your qualifications. We employed you here as a journalist, and therefore you don't have experience. However, Ken Themba had sufficient experience because he was getting promoted, within no time he was moving in as a journalist. But what happened? He had to do a story he was going to Kimberley, traveling with Bob Hosani. And then while in Kronstadt on their way to Kimberley, there was an incident where there was a fire. And this is how Ken Themba reported it, that there was a Woolworth store was on fire, and then next to the Woolworth store.
Just before you go, Siphiwo, I don't believe that story, by the way. But go ahead and tell the story.
This is what we are told, that they had to rescue a white man. The fire was there apparently, but they had to rescue a store next to Woolworths, which happened to be a bottle store. And they helped a white man, and they were given 5 bottles. So they had to keep the bottles good company. But they were not really drunk because they drank only 4 or so of them. And
of course, they had to help the white man. And
they were helping a white man. So now they were in trouble with another white man, now the editor, for rescuing one white man with his bottle of alcohol.
And helping it meant that they had to drink the alcohol.
So after that, he was effectively demoted, continued working as the associate editor, but his money was significantly reduced. So he was not happy at work, but he had to continue working. And this is someone whom we know, is a qualified teacher, and was living a relatively decent life before becoming a journalist.
So it gets worse when he moves to Swaziland. Maybe let's start there. Intriguing that he decides, of all places, Swaziland, when his counterparts, his colleagues had moved to the US, to Europe, and so on. He chooses Swaziland. I was fascinated by the answer he gave, or at least the answer his wife gave on his behalf, about why Swaziland of all places.
Yeah, look, in the first place, we have to be clear that he did not want to leave South Africa, So moving to Swaziland was the next best thing for him to remain connected to South Africa culturally. As you know, that linguistically, there are so many commonalities between South Africa and Swaziland. And also, obviously, he went there to write. And this is what I was trying to highlight, that in South Africa, he had lost his job, and he knew that he was about to get banned as a writer. Mm-hmm. Much as he refused, I use this quote by him. where he says, must we lose all our best people to other countries? Teachers, lawyers, doctors, writers, all troop the end road to the north. Obviously, South Africa has left the poorer, and one would have thought this country just can't afford the loss. No. So Ken Themba was really against the idea of leaving South Africa. And by the way, this quote, I take it from one of the stories that are not very well known, because he wrote it using a pseudonym, Murongwa Sireto, which is a combination of his first daughter's name and his wife's maiden surname. So some of the works that he published are not known because he either used somebody else's name or used a pseudonym like this one.
Yeah, and the irony thereof that he's banished under, I think, the Communist Act or something silly like that, when, you know, he didn't even believe in communism. He wasn't a communist at all.
Yeah, I mean, his articles in the 50s, for instance, he wrote in the Golden City Post, you know, this is why I'm not a communist. And he unpacked communism and why he cannot be a communist. And then he was really attacked by some readers, and some came to his defense that this makes perfect sense. And then his next article was, I'm not a communist, but neither am I a fascist. I hate fascism even more. And then he again explained. So it's quite ironic that the same man would be banned under the Anti-Communism Act.
We move then to Swaziland, which I think, I mean, quite sad. He had established himself in Sophia Town. I mean, the House of Truth was an institution. Everybody knew that. Sophia Town goes, a bit of him goes with that. And he's in limbo all this time. Eventually, when he gets to Swaziland, I think the man had kind of lost something. And when you hear him talk about, and he writes about searching for shebeens, and of course in Swaziland, drinking alcohol was legal, right? So a man maybe feeling a little bit out of place.
Well, he tried to make a living in Swaziland. When he got there, he went back to teaching. He first taught at Scott, the Swaziland Trade School, and then later on went to teach in a high school. But by that time he had come from South Africa, where he was frustrated, where he was drinking a lot. So he continued the story in his very last collection, or rather the latest collection of his work called Requiem for Sophia Town. I think came out in 2006. The very last story is called The Last Shebeen, where it's a very short piece where he talks about a shebeen he had discovered in Swaziland. And he says, of course, it's a Picanini compared to the shebeens of Sophia Town. And he says, trust Ken Themba to find a shebeen even in a desert. But interestingly, in Swaziland, he reunited with another friend.
Pitika?
No.
Pitika?
No, Pitika was a young man at the time. He had a journalist friend, Pax Mangena.
Yes.
Pax Mangena, he had known Pax Mangena in Sophia Town. And then when he went to Swaziland, they reunited there. And once again, I was fortunate to interview Pax Mangena, and he shared a picture of the two of them in what he called the Ken Themba corner, taken in one of his favorite watering holes in Babane.
What do you think the move, and somehow, I mean, I don't know, you've spoken to the family. What was that relationship like? I'm not sure what to make of his relationship with his wife, his family, while he was in Swaziland. I mean, I get the sense that this was a man who was troubled. Of course, he couldn't be published. He all he wanted to do was write. Now he had no outlet. Decision to move away from his wife, and I know it's because of work, but I'm trying to understand, what do you think was happening there? Maybe also trying to understand his ultimate demise.
Yeah, you see, unfortunately, Ken Themba's family life is something that has barely been reported on, up until recently. Ken Themba, for instance, when after the forced removals in Soha Town, he lived in Dube with his in-laws. And then when they moved to to Swaziland in Mbabane, they lived as this nuclear family. And in fact, there they lived in a government house. While Ken Themba was a lecturer at Scott. But it's only when he went to teach in Manzini that Ken Themba had to move away and find accommodation, so to speak. He rented a flat in Manzini where he taught. His wife at the time remained in Mbabane because she was running a crèche, which was the first preschool funded by UNICEF in Swaziland, was run by his wife, Ken Themba. So the family, he lived a normal family life, except that he only went to join his family, his growing family, on weekends in Mbabane. Yeah.
The reason I'm baffled, I'm not quite sure what was happening here. I do get the sense that she had a decent job. She was running the UNICEF creche, as you mentioned, and it was a good thing. But she does every now and then almost threaten to leave. She says, Ken, when are you finishing the book? When are you finishing the book? If you don't finish the book, I'm leaving. I'm going back to South Africa.
Yeah, the very reason Ken Themba, decided to go to England, he wanted to be free, he wanted to be free to write, and top of his agenda was to write a book, and the book was not forthcoming, and she started making these threats to him, which to me, we all know it was very unlikely that an exile would easily go back to South Africa in that way. I think the whole point was to say he came here with a purpose, and the purpose was for you to be able to write a book, and they had to achieve that. Yeah.
He obviously dies, and I'm struck by the murmurs around his death. So yes, there's an autopsy report, right? But there is something quite intriguing about his death. Everybody talks about it. The villagers talk about it. People in South Africa talk about it. People write about it. People write poetry about it and add all kinds of mystical things to the story of how he dies. What do you think that was about?
Well, he was a prominent person, and when he died, he was alone. So there will be all kinds of ideas around his death. But I think the closest person, and this is the chapter that I opened with, that of his death. The closest person who gave me almost first-hand information is Professor Pitika Ntuli. Who was visiting him because he had interactions with Ken Themba as a child in Sophia Town, and then they meet in Swaziland. Pitika is a student, and Ken Themba is a teacher. And at the time, Pitika Ntuli had already opened his own House of Truth in Libombo, and Ken Themba actually visited. So they had that kind of relationship. And so Ken Themba continued to be some sort of a mentor to Professor Pitika Ntuli. And then on the day Ken Themba passed, Pitika came to visit. They knocked. He was not responding. They could see that he is there, he is in bed when they looked through the keyhole. And this troubled him a great deal. So, I mean, he had to travel back to Libombo, I think it's about 25 kilometers, and then woke up the following morning, hitchhiked to come and check again, because he was troubled by the fact that he was not responding at all. And then that's when he discovered that Ken had passed and his body was being removed from the flat. So because he died alone, there was no, the autopsy obviously said it was coronary thrombosis. But the truth is he died of broken heart. He was broken in so many ways as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I mean, one gets a sense in the end, I mean, quite a tragic end to the story. It ends very young. He's 43 years old. So much that we still wanted to get from the man, and we find ourselves here. But I guess as you do the work, you keep uncovering things that we were not aware of, adding to the richness of what he left us with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ken Themba, as I said earlier, his work has outlived him. And obviously, his best work was still lying ahead. And this is the criticism that has been there over the years, that he, compared to his, his talent and intellectual depth, there was much more that was expected of him. So unfortunately, he died that young. But even though he died that young, his work really lasted, outlived him and several others in his generation. And I'm yet to know a single short story, for instance, that is as successful as The Suit, which, whether you're talking film, whether you're talking comics, whether you're talking theater, it's been adapted throughout these mediums, and it is successful in all of them.
So I'm going to read you something that's come through the chats, and it says, "You are, without doubt, the foremost and leading expert in the best of drum era 50s. And thank you for repatriating, especially the memory of Ken Themba and his colleagues." And I mean, it goes on to say much more wonderful things. I'm sure we'll send you a screen grab. It's been such a pleasure having this lunch hour with you. Thank you. Congratulations. This is really a riveting read. It is a lot of work has gone into this, we can see. And thanks for digging up all that you have. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Siphiwo.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, I guess that's it. That's the end of this particular lunch hour special. Thank you, everybody, and continue following the chats. As you can see, follow on Facebook and all sorts of social media platforms. Goodbye.